Okay, we're just going to jump right in. I've actually been doing all sorts of tests and stuff because, once again, I'm not happy with my connection. It's giving me unstable connection messages and stuff, even though I'm very close to my router. They say, "Oh, just plug into the router." I can't. I can't. I've got a MacBook Air. It's too thin. Those Ethernet cables physically do not plug into it. So this is the best I can do for now until I figure that out. So anyway, this is the Dark Crystal, which won the poll, which I was very pleased to see the amount of participation in. So that's great. So I don't know how many people are actually going to be around to watch this live, but hopefully you'll get it watched, because this was not planned for tonight. And at one point, Jay and I were going to do a movie discussion Pocket Dimension episode, which we don't usually do on Friday because the rest of the week was kind of screwing up. And then kind of last minute we had a change. And I thought, well, I have some time on my hands, so let's do the Dark Crystal tonight. So that's what we're doing. Here is the 25th anniversary DVD. The special thing. So, I mean, you do the math. That makes it a fairly old DVD. You can get this on 4K. In fact, I've even seen it in the store, and I just didn't get it. I mean, not that I wouldn't get it. I own a couple 4K versions of movies like Blade Runner 2049 stuff, even though I don't have a 4K TV. Do you need a 4K play? I don't know. But anyway, but still, they come with like non-4K versions too. So, I mean, I definitely should get it. That's, again, one of my favorite movies of all time. And just like I was talking about, this is kind of what I'm focusing on after having done shut up, cat. After having done The Secret of Nim, is this was, especially in the 80s. In fact, both these movies came out in the same year, 82, but it just means there was just a great wealth of sort of dark children's fantasy. This even has dark right in the title, that I'm just a huge fan of. It's so like one of my favorite genres or subgenres, whatever you want to call it. And it's kind of the main thing I write as a writer. I write other stuff, but the main stuff that I feel like I might actually have a chance of getting published someday is in that, which is sort of like not little kids, but kids sort of fantasy. YA fantasy, of course, has blown up in the last 20 years or so. Harry Potter kind of opened the floodgates for that, some even more mature stuff than that. And that's not really what I'm talking about here. This is maybe a little more simplified or pure, or whatever you want to call it. But anyway, if you did vote in the poll and you didn't vote for the Dark Crystal, don't worry. The other 3 movies, they'll all get done. I mean, why not? I'll have the time and I want to do them. This was just to see what I would do first. And again, the plan was not to do it tonight, but since I have the opportunity and some time opened up here, it should open up here. But right, so I am paused past like the opening stuff. I'm like at right where it goes right into the movie, so I'll give people, and just in case anybody is watching, some time to do that. I don't know where it might be streaming. Of course, Netflix has the wonderful prequel TV series that I like very much, that I was rumored for so many years. Just back when they were making it, there were rumors about its possible sequel to this movie, and from about 2009 on, there was a lot of talk about what could be done and what might be done, and they wound up doing the Netflix series, 10 episodes, and it's great. I really love it. I really am happy with how it turned out. Suddenly I can't remember what its actually long title is. It works as a prequel, sort of showing how the Skeksis would come to dominate the world. At this point, they're already kind of in control. They already rule the Gelflings, but a lot of the Gelflings don't seem to mind as much. They're kind of used to it, and they don't know just how bad the Skeksis are. And the movie, shows how things get from bad to worse. Because, of course, when this movie starts, it's a very dead world, and I think that's kind of cool too. What's the world called? Like Thraw, I think, is the name of the world. You think I'd remember for a movie that I know back and forth. But anyway, yeah, the planet's called Thraw. It's a pretty impossible planet, actually, because of where it shows. It has like 3 suns, which would like make, if they were that close, it would be like hotter than Mercury. Nothing could live. But anyway, artistic license, a fantasy world, and that's one of the main things that appeals to me about this, is that it's a complete fantasy world, kind of like an animated movie, except it's not animated. Of course, it's Jim Henson using his puppets, his puppetry, and the designs come from fantasy artist Brian Froud. I hope that's how you say it. Froud is his name. He's produced a staggering amount of work based on it ever since, and I love his style and everything. It's just a great creative world. The whole point was to, like, unlike most fantasy that's based on, not that this doesn't have roots in various human mythologies too, because of course it does. But as far as the Denzians, the citizens, the creatures themselves, they're all supposed to they're really trying to not base them on humans or existing animals. They're supposed to be sort of completely original alien types of creatures and species, which I really like. So the movie was, I think Jim Henson first came up with the concept late 75, early 76. I don't know how long it took before they started doing production and stuff. The shooting itself took place throughout 1981, but it took a lot of time and work to get this movie done, of course, and didn't have obviously the computer effects that we have now. Because even in the one thing we were concerned about in the making of the Netflix show was like, oh, is it going to be all puppetry? Or are they going to use anything digital? They didn't, but you can still benefit from that. Because one thing they could do is they could just, if they had a scene, and they've got some very complicated puppets going on, where the puppeteer is in frame, well, they can just digitally remove them later, which is a great thing. They didn't have that option back at the start of the 80s. So they had to be, really creative and careful about how the shots were made and where they positioned the puppeteers so that they wouldn't, be seen and ruin the movie, break the reality. So, yeah, a lot of creativity went into that. So, of course, this is Jim Henson, but he did technically co-direct it with Frank Oz. He's also obviously wrote the original story, but David Odell wrote the screenplay. Who was the producer? I have all this stuff set up, and then it disappears on me. Because we're going to jump into the movie in another second. This is a long enough intro, I'm sure. Gary Kurtz. Yeah, that's who. Gary Kurtz. So anyway, this is a movie that I never saw all the way through as a kid, actually. It wasn't until I was about 18 that I actually saw it start to finish. But before that, I kind of knew what it was. I'd seen bits and pieces here and there, maybe, although it was not a movie that came on TV. So I'm not exactly sure. But it was like early in my tenure at university when I came up here as a fresh-faced 18-year-old, just short of 20 years ago. Oh, my God. And what's funny is when I came up here for school, the University of King's College, actually that fall, it's funny, like maybe she didn't actually go to King's because I don't remember ever seeing her again after meeting her, and this is a small campus. So maybe she was a friend of somebody, but I met a girl whose name was Kira, K-R-A, just like in the movie, whose parents named her because of the movie. So that's pretty cool. But I never saw her again that I can recall. I met her like in September 2001, when you're meeting all these people, and I can't remember exactly the setting or anything. It wasn't in a class or anything like that. It was just, one of those sort of get-togethers on campus that you had. And I remember talking to her a bit and saying I was a fan of the movie, even though at the time I was not a huge fan because I don't even know if I'd seen it all the way through at that point. But very shortly after that, I did rectify that, and it's been one of my favorite films ever since. So let's jump into it, and hopefully it's not too loud. So yeah, I'm past like the weird titles. This is going to go right into the movie. So 3, 2, 1, ignition. And I will work on the volume so it's not too loud. Okay, it's not. Okay, so actually it's going into the Universal logo. So that's where I'm starting. There were actually some other things beforehand, but this is the opening on the Universal logo from the early 80s that you might remember. And now it goes right into War Great Entertainment presents for ITC Entertainment, a Jim Henson film. So, of course, I'm sure this was probably kind of seen something as a risk, too, because I'm going to have some narration here. It's a great opening. Another world, another time in the age of wonder. I mean, it just sets the tone so perfectly. I know it's simple, but sometimes that's all you need. But I just love, the crystal cracked. So this world, of course, is dominated by the power of the crystal. And that's interesting. That's been used in other sort of fantasy too. The idea of some object of power or artifact, it affects so much that like if something happens to it, it affects the entire world and landscape. So here we have basically a world of ruin, very desolate place. The castle looks so cool. Everything looks cool. So I'll try not to go, oh, this looks cool, that looks cool as the movie goes. But the Skeksis, you can benefit from watching this movie with the subtitles on, as I do when I watch these, just because I usually have to put the volume low, because it helps you catch and remember some names and things, of course. Now, an early concept for this with the Skeksis, this is after they figured out what they look like and everything. Now, there's 10 of them left. There's 10 of them, and each counterpart for them is one of the ancients. So there's 10. So he wanted them based on the 7 deadly sins, and they are, but the problem is there's 10, so they kind of had to double a couple of them. But also, anyway, when he originally thought of this, he thought they would speak their own language, because there are some characters in this movie that speak a foreign made-up language. And what was going on? Yeah, so he had this idea, but they would speak sort of, some sort of grunting, shrieking language as you expect from like these weird bird-like creatures, which is already kind of harsh. But also his plan was to not have it subtitled for the audience. You were just supposed to watch these scenes of the Skeksis communicating with each other and not actually know what they're saying. His idea was he hoped that you would get the gist, you would get the general idea of what they were saying, and your imagination could sort of fill in the details. Either he changed his mind or somebody talked him out of that, because that is a horrible idea. Maybe he saw the Star Wars holiday special and those bits of the Wookiees going at each other with absolutely no subtitles or anything, which, was so grating after like 30 seconds. There you go, the Dark Crystal. The things come up. So at least now I can do reliable counts. So 250 is where we're at here for a timestamp. So yeah, the whole thing here is, well, actually, I guess there's 11 Skeksis at the moment because the Emperor is about to die. And then we'll get reduced down to 10. So the whole thing is their Emperor's going to die and they're going to elect a new one, and however they do that. There we go, conceptual designer Brian Froud. So I'd say, like, after Henson himself and maybe Oz, like, Froud is maybe the most important person in this movie because his art is really what made this world. I'm sure he had input, but I love it. I'm going to eventually get the book that came out in the 80s, The World of the Dark Crystal. It's still in print and you can get it. I'd love to get it. Music by Trevor Jones. I wonder, I don't know, last time I watched it with subtitles, if this will actually provide some of the names, because basically to understand the names of like the Skeksis, for most of them, they're not named, in the dialogue, but in the end credits, you'll see their names. Directed by Jim Henson and Frank Oz. So there we go. We're at the end of the credits and moving on here. And you can see, well, if there's only 10 or 11 of them, what's on the upper thing? Well, creatures that are not Skeksis that we'll get to. But I mean, I love anything that sort of has like a big emphasis on world building. The idea of introducing a completely fictional world, like completely different in every way, and building up its history. I mean, it all sort of started, I guess, in the West with like, well, maybe not started, but it became like a really big deal because it used to be, when you had various legends and folk tales and fairy tales, the world building was kind of minimal. You would just sort of get thrown into a story. They'd say how things work, but there weren't a lot of details given. You could just hint at it. I think really the first Western writer, at least, to come up with the idea of like, let's give a real sense of, history and weight to this was, of course, Tolkien. And I'm a huge Tolkien fan, and that's kind of what I'm into again. I just started reading some of the books again after having watched some of the movies again, too. And, his stuff is so dense and so complex that I think for most of it, again, he was doing it for his own amusement. And that's the thing about Tolkien, not to get too off topic here, and that's why, like, he was never a professional author. And what's one of the reasons why his books turned out the way they did. He didn't have to worry about like an editor and stuff. I remember having a conversation with somebody not too long ago saying, if you haven't, read The Lord of the Rings, you might be kind of surprised by the way it reads, because it doesn't follow some of the beats or rules that you would find in most sort of stories of that kind of epic scope. And there's all sorts of scenes and things that would never get past an editor, probably. They'd be like, oh, you can't use this, But he didn't really have to worry about that because he wasn't really that concerned about it. I mean, The Hobbit wound up getting sort of published on a whim, and it was so great that there was a demand for the sequel. And he said, well, originally The Hobbit was not actually written to be part of his legendarium, but he lined up so well and had some details that he decided that it would. So anyway, so springboarded right into The Lord of the Rings, which he was going to write either way. Whether it was going to get published or not, he was going to write it, more or less. Because again, it was for his own enjoyment, and he shared things, he had a correspondence. But we'll get off Tolkien, because you know what? We'll do those movies on this channel, because why the hell not? I want to talk. The point of these solo ones is to really talk about the stuff I like best. Not that I wouldn't have other people on here, but I don't want to get distracted or talk about different things. I like doing that on other live commentaries, but these are going to be a little more focused. So anyway, I've talked through. We got Jen, our main character, who's the last of his race, supposedly, the Gelflings, and you find out that's because of a prophecy. And he is raised by one of the ancients here. But the ancient that was sort of like his parent or whatever was the counterpart of the emperor. So as the emperor dies dying, Eli's dying. So when one dies, they'll go together. They're linked. You know, there you can find. I don't know if it's still on YouTube, but in 2013 there was a leak of the supposed original cut that included some of the extended and deleted scenes that got deleted that had some more exposition and stuff, and it included the Skeksis blathering in their language. I've watched it; it's pretty hilarious watching the Skeksis just go, and you have no idea what they're saying. It's kind of awful. So I mean, for a long time, except for some small things, you know, it was not really much of a franchise. It was one movie in bits and pieces. Before putting this on, I did hunt through my comic boxes a little because I own 2 or 3 issues of the original Marvel comic adaptation from the early 80s. I have them. I just don't know where they are. But anyway, in the lead up to this last few years, there have been some other sort of sequels and prequels and stuff. This is the first volume of Beneath the Dark Crystal. There are 3 of these, and is this the first? Yes, this is the first. And what's funny is I only have the first. I need the other 2. And with the power of the Dark Crystal, this is the third. I don't have the first 2, so I need to fill those holes. Really beautiful art in these that really fit the style of the world. And they followed it. It's set in the same world, but following different characters. I think some are before and some are after. I can't remember. I'll have to read them more fully when I have the whole thing. But these are nice little hardcovers that I like. You can get them soft cover, but I prefer the hardcover in these. All right, so now Jen is being told about what he has to do, the quest he has to set out on, and he has to find Aughra. It's kind of like Luke being told to seek out Yoda, which is kind of funny because Aughra, of course, is voiced by Frank Oz, the voice of Yoda. Of course, he does a female voice for this, which he's been doing for years, a very good Miss Piggy, of course. He actually said he was inspired by another one of these movies that I mentioned the other day for like fantasy movies that are like a bit dark, and that was movie I still don't own. Watership Down. Oz said that he was inspired by Zero Mostel's performance as the Crow in Watership Down a little bit for his voice work for Aughra, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, I mean, it's funny. Both this and the one I just did. Man, I'm spacing on stuff today, which is not good when you're doing something by yourself. But The Secret of Nim is like, I only own them as very old DVDs. I really need to get Blu-rays of them, 4K or whatever, but you know, because they are among my favorite movies ever. Because there's a lot of movies I own on DVD and I'm fine with them. I'm not going to double dip. I don't need the Blu-ray. I don't care. Once was enough, because you know I do this enough with stuff like comics and things like that. I can go on a rant about that later. But these, yeah, I really do need to get newer versions, particularly Secret of Nim, because I mean, not only is it just an old DVD, but it's very bare bones. You know, there's nothing on it, no features, nothing. There's got to be a better release of it, I would assume. You know, it'd be nice if they would do like some sort of like box set for Don Bluth's films. To my knowledge, there's no such thing, at least in North American release. Sometimes these things do get set in like the UK and places. So here's the bird-like and reptilian Skeksis. Everything about them's repulsive, which is obviously the point. They're very obvious bad guys, sort of following the whole thing. And bad guys are ugly, good guys are attractive, but you know that works at a lot. It's tried and true, and it's always nice to see that get reversed or changed. And I mean, I mean, in this case, at least, yes, the Skeksis are evil and repulsive and physically awful to look at and everything. And there's a scene later where they eat, and it's disgusting. But it also shows that like Aughra's ugly too, but she's a force for good and stuff. So it's not just all, you know, good, attractive, bad, ugly. So the Emperor's still hanging on here. They're just all around his bed, pretending to be respectful, but they just want him to die so they can get on with it. Skeksis are a very evil, self-serving race. No shit. They're like, oh, is he finally going to croak? I mean, croak is a very good word for these characters. When a Skeksis dies, yeah, croak seems appropriate. So there's the... I always want to say Chancellor, but it's the Chamberlain. And Chamberlain is very much the Starscream of this movie. Although it's a little different, because the whole thing is any of them would like to be the leader. So they're all kind of the Starscream, but he's definitely the most sort of devious and yeah. So what's going to happen here is, there's going to be a little power struggle now that the Emperor is truly dead. So there's a little bit of a delay, I guess. Either that or this was, this doesn't have to be exact. Oh, yeah, okay. So it is pretty much synced up. They die at the same time, more or less. And he fades away again. That's sort of like Star Wars, like an old Jedi. He fades away like Obi-Wan or Yoda. Some similarities there. All right, if I blab through it, the Great Conjunction is when the three suns sort of line up, and that's when the crystal cracked. And now another Great Conjunction is coming. So the idea is like if they could repair the crack in the crystal, and the whole thing is, and he's gonna have our what's the word? MacGuffin, which is a shard of the Dark Crystal, which he's going to take on his quest to try to Jen. So the ancients here they're kind of like monks. They even sort of have like a monk-like chant that they do later, a very sort of low Gregorian chant type of thing. So there are parts of the world you can see here. So we're at just almost 14 minutes in. Nice shot. There are parts of the world that still look okay, that aren't completely decayed and horrible, but the closer you get to the realm of the Skeksis and the location of the crystal, the worse it gets, as you might expect. So some shots, of course, they are actual physical real world, like that waterfall, and some of these long shots here of him coming down the thing. And then you've got more intimate, closer environments where nothing is real. It's all created. And it's a great blending of that, which I think is really cool. The Emperor's dead. Long live the Emperor. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, it should be 10. It should be 10 now. I'm pretty sure they went from 11 to 10 and not 10 to 9. Let's see. By the way, it was Dark Crystal Age of Resistance was the prequel series. It came out in 2019 on Netflix. Really love it. I'm going to watch it again soon now that I'm watching this, of course. All right. So they all know what's coming. Power vacuum. Time to make my move. And it seems to have come down to 2. You've got Chamberlain and other guy whose name you think I would remember. I guess he's the general. Sketson. Chamberlain's name technically is Sketsil. Snapping each other is kind of like the raptors snapping each other in Jurassic Park. So they're going to do a challenge, and I guess there's different sorts of challenges. There must be different ones. It's interesting that Chamberlain, who seems to be the less physical of the two, he's the one that picks Trial by Stone, which is a very physical challenge. So then you can see the podlings, which are now a slave race. Once again, to just prove how awful the Skeksis are, they've got slaves literally in chains and collars doing all their manual labor. So they're pulling up this great big stone. Trial by Stone. Yeah. I'd like to know what other trials there might have been. This is the only one we know, but you get the idea that they had a choice of several. And spoilers, the Chamberlain's going to lose. And the stakes are pretty high, because not only does he not get to be emperor, if he loses, I guess he gets banished. Pretty straightforward thing here. Take the swords. Who can cut the most off the stone? Okay. Yeah, because at first it looks like they're going to have a big sword fight, but It's just to cut the stone. Very smooth, kind of alien-looking stone. That whole nodding and looking ahead, that's very, we've seen those mannerisms in some of the classic Muppets from like the Muppet Show. I'm not exactly sure which ones, but I know we've seen it before. That nodding and doing sort of like this, and that self-satisfaction. So how is this judged exactly? Like, who did better on the first two? We don't know. But the general's about to make that moot with his next strike. Okay, well, you can't do any better than that. All hail the new emperor. I mean, there's so much detail on these guys, not just like the creatures themselves, but like their costumes. Very ornamental, lavish robes and various pieces of jewelry. So much work and detail into these. Most of the Skeksis don't even get named or anything, but they're all, you can tell them all apart. They all have a very distinct look from each other. It's pretty cool. Speaking of his clothes, they're going to rip off most of them to, I guess, rob him of his title and finery. I mean, no wonder. I mean, they're very skeletal, and I mean, you're not surprised. They're hideous creatures, but you understand why they like drape themselves and all this stuff to at least cover up their awful bodies. Because what's underneath, as you see, is not pretty. I mean, you love being emperor of like 7 other people. Knock yourself out, buddy. But I mean, that's the whole Skeksis mindset, right? You gotta be the ruler. You gotta be on top. Because even the lowliest, if they have some sort of hierarchy, is still in charge of all the slaves. They've got slaves to like work to the podlings that do manual labor and various just household stuff. But then they've also got their sort of warriors that they send out that we'll see. I'm just reading about some of the mythological inspirations. Some really interesting stuff in there. But I won't bog us down with too many details. Dark Crystal was billed as the first live-action film without any human beings on screen and a showcase of cutting-edge animatronics. Was it the first live-action film without any human beings on screen? I don't know. I think I've thought about it. Oh, right, yeah, you can. Sometimes the crystal shows you stuff. Ah, the Gartham. Okay, that's the warriors. We're talking about these large beetle-like monsters with huge shells. They're the Gartham, but anyway. So in the crystal, they just saw a vision, or perhaps it's like a live shot of Jen setting out on his quest. Because the whole thing is there's a prophecy, the idea being their rule will be ended by a Gelfling, which is why the Gelflings were wiped out, which is, I guess, how Age of Resistance would end, which is really sad because they were a whole race, they were a whole society. And they get massacred, an actual genocide because of the prophecy. Where's the prophecy? I know it gets said later in the movie, but let's say it. When single shines the triple sun, what was sundered and undone shall be whole, the two made one, by Gelfling hand, or else by none. So that's pretty simple. We can break that down. Single shines the triple sun means the 3 suns lining up with each other. Sundered and undone, the crystal itself, shall be whole, the two made one, referring to the races of the Skeksis and the Ancients, because they actually were originally one race that was broken apart, by Gelfling hand or else by none, meaning only the Gelfling. And yeah, so we've got supposed last of his species here, but of course we're going to find out there is another. I got to stop at the Star Wars references, but a lot of this lines up nicely with Star Wars and Frank Oz. The alpha, yeah. So Jen's making his way through an interesting mountain range, very alien looking. I mean, it's a scary world, as you can see. Like, it's teeming with life. Everything's pretty dangerous. I guess he's never veered out of their valley because he's kind of weirded out. Huh. Well, we found Agra. All right, the eye. She can carry one of her eyes around. So the subtitles don't work for her foreign language, but she'll start speaking English or the common tongue or whatever soon. There we go. Oz is talented. It's hard to believe that that's a man doing the voice. I like that. He's dead. Could be anywhere then. It's a very Agra thing to say. Well, you are really freaky. Right, so she has the crystal shard. He doesn't. She has lots of crystal shards. I can't remember what the deal is. She has lots of crystal shards, but she's not sure which one actually is part of the dark crystal, and he helps her figure it out. You'd think I'd remember better for a movie that I've seen so many times. But she does have it, but I remember she has quite a few. I think she doesn't know which one is the real one or something. But maybe it glows in the presence of a gelfling. We're gonna find out. Yeah. So. You know, I don't have much experience with kids, but I remember I did watch this movie with a kid a few years ago. I put it on specifically for something that a kid could watch. I don't know. He was maybe 8 or 9, and he did like it, but he kind of never stopped asking questions throughout the whole thing. And it's like, just watch the movie and you'll see. But now, if you have questions, you can watch my live commentary, and I never shut up throughout it. Agra's observatory or workshop, whatever you want to call it. Very cool. Is there a word for what those things are? Yeah, it's called an orrery. That's what a mechanical model of the solar system is. It's an orrery. So she's going to tell him a little bit about the Great Conjunction. I'm doing this stuff myself. Right. 3 suns lining up. Yeah, I was calling them the ancients or the mystics. Sorry. So that other race, the good race counterpart, they're not the ancients, they're the mystics. Again, big mistake for somebody who supposedly knows the movie so well. Okay, I'll ask. This wasn't planned, so usually I try to have something more interesting to drink. I'm just back to my normal, crappy, disappointing Nestea. It's no fun. Yeah, I like Agra's dialogue a lot. She's quirky but wise. Right, so she's got a whole box full of shards, and she doesn't know which one is the right one, I guess. Yeah, she doesn't know. Her movements are great. She's right about having no time. So what happens here? How exactly do they determine which shard is the right one? That's what we're about to see. He's gotten it down to 3. We don't know how, but just by his feeling, I guess. Yeah, so there's a lot of internal monologue on his part, and I like it. You don't see that in very many movies, and I realize it would be maybe out of place or clunky in a lot of movies, but I think in this sort of world, this sort of fantasy, it fits well. I like seeing internal monologue. It's a pretty rare thing in movies. All right, he's got his weird little ocarina there. That's how he decides. By playing a note in his ocarina. The middle one glows purple, the color of this movie, which is why it's the banner. Yeah, so this is a 2-disc set with some special features, including deleted scenes. But it can't be all the deleted scenes, because I remember in 2013 it was sort of a big deal that those deleted scenes were leaked. So they can't all be on here. Because this definitely predates 2013. Because, yeah, I mean, the 25th anniversary should be what, 2007? And, yeah, here come the Algrim, or whatever they're called, to wreck up the joint. Four of them. Jen falls out the window, but she's going to get captured. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so no, it isn't. So, yeah, I was a little confused there. It is a female voice. For some reason, I thought it was. So, okay, so that's Billy Whitelaw actually doing the voice. That's weird. I thought it was Frank Oz. I guess it's because Frank Oz originally did the voice. So sorry about that. I mistook. It is actually a female. It is an actress doing that. Billy Honor Whitelaw, now deceased. So again, I probably knew that at some point and then forgot and then misremembered it as Frank Oz. Because, yeah, Frank Oz originally did the voice. But anyway, he definitely is the puppeteer for her. I know that's for sure. Yeah, she's performed by Frank Oz. but Billy Whitelaw is the voice. Okay, so I was half right, half wrong. Yeah, the Skeksis were so complicated that they required 2 performers besides the voice. So technically, like, and then of course there's all the technicians that would work on various animatronics with their facial expressions and stuff. So I mean, these are really complicated puppets. I mean, the word puppet is kind of an oversimplification just to how sophisticated and complicated these things were. Yet, you know, the movie, once again, like a lot of these movies I'm talking about, they were not really big in their time because maybe they were ahead of their time, especially with the darker tone in the 80s, 90s, and even now. Again, it's sort of an animation age ghetto thing, although it's not always animation, you know. North American audiences are constantly baffled by stuff that's a little dark. It's like, oh, my kids can't handle this. I mean, in general, there's plenty of people that love it, but I mean, that's like all my favorite stuff. We're going to do Return to Oz on this channel soon, which is a wonderful dark fantasy. And I remember back in the days when I used to use the IMDb a lot, and, you know, people could put on comments and stuff. I remember whole threads of people being like, this is like a horror movie for children, and this movie scarred me. I was like, you guys suck. That's what I loved about it. Yes, that movie literally gave me nightmares, but I loved that movie as a kid, and I love it now. I believe that was part of the poll, so it will be done soon. Another one that I don't own like on Blu-ray or anything. It's, again, a fairly old DVD, but it'll get the job done for the purposes of a live commentary anyway. But I mean, you know, Neil Gaiman did Coraline, which they did eventually make a movie of that I didn't watch for a long time because I figured I'd hate it, but that movie's, you know, very well received and basically a classic. Like, I love all that stuff. Like, it's basically sort of, it's kidsy in a way. It could be enjoyed by children, but it has that darker element, that darker edge to it. I mean, I get it. It's not for everybody. Some kids aren't going to like it. Some parents are always going to freak out. That's just the way of things. But I don't know. I was always a kid that loved that stuff, and it, you know, just continued right into adulthood, and it's had very much to do with the taste that I have now. Because as I said, this dark fantasy thing, this like sort of like PG-13 dark fantasy, accessible to kids, but also kind of scary. You know, that's like my wheelhouse. So there's Fitzgig. So I remember, speaking of like, well, one of the first times I watched this, I remember watching this with my friends Sam and Shane back when we lived together at King's in our first or second year. And when, so here's the introduction of Kira, of course, and they're both baffled because they were both told they were the last of the Gelflings, and now they're seeing another one for the first time. But anyway, her little pet here is Fizzgig. I can't remember if we were, you know, just like not listening or what, but we thought she said like Jizz Kit or something. So we were like, Jizz Kit. And we used to do this thing a year or two later. I remember when I lived in my first apartment with my sister and Shane, where we would go to the grocery store and we would buy cakes from, you know, the bakery department, and we would tell them to write stuff on cakes, and we would tell them to write completely stupid like inside jokes. And one of them was like, it involved Jizz Kit. I don't know if it was Happy Birthday Jizz Kit or Bon Voyage Jizz Kit or Congratulations Jizz Kit or something like that. And Shane was, I think we did like rock, paper, scissors to see who would make her do it. And Shane's just like, well, I made a woman write jizz on a cake. My day's complete. Oh, we had a bunch of them. I remember we created these characters that I won't go into detail about because then people steal them. But no, we had these little comic book stick figure characters called Fiend and Stoop. Fiend was an alligator in a top hat that spoke German. And Stoop was a little German schoolboy that was like friends. It was kind of like I don't know, like Mr. Peabody and Sherman type situation, right? It was supposed to be, the idea was like, he was like, it was his mentor and he learned from him, except it just spoke in German nonsense words. Anyway, I think once we like had a cake that had like them on it, like Fiend and Stoop, like Bon Voyage or something stupid. Yeah, those were the days. Right, now they're doing like a cool mind meld thing. When they touch, they can see each other's memories, which is very cool. See how he was raised by the Mystics and she was raised by the Podlings. Again, they meet in a swamp. This whole thing is kind of reminiscent of like Dagobah. Yeah, 2001 was the year, you know, in the spring of 2001, I graduated high school, and in the fall of 2001, I started college, so pretty cool. But yeah, and 2001, as I've said before, is my favorite year in film. And it's kind of interesting because it's also the year that I started like being like sort of like a serious film person. A lot of that had to do again with, Shane, because he was a really big movie fan. Before that, I liked movies, but I didn't consider myself like much of an expert on them or anything. And I liked them, but but it was my time with Shane that really influenced me, made me, become more than just a casual fan into a more serious fan and really, getting into actors and directors and all that stuff instead of just the surface things about films. Really shaped, again, the person that I am, and I become blabbing on YouTube about them years later, but that's really what was the start of it. So, 2001 has Spirited Away, which is in a tie for my favorite movie of all time with Indiana Jones and Last Crusade, but 2001 also has another anime, the lesser known Metropolis, based on the Osamu Tezuka comic from way back in the 40s, directed by Rintaro. What are some other? Amelie's from 2001. Donnie Darko's from 2001. That really good, The Devil's Backbone by Guillermo del Toro. Guillermo del Toro is from 2001. So, yeah. And there's even a couple more. And that just made it 2000. I made a list of my top 10 on a letterbox just to point out. That's why it's my favorite year in all of film, because it's just stacked for me. And like I said, there's even a couple others that are really good that I didn't mention. So here we have the Banquet of the Disgusting. Just in case you weren't already completely repulsed by the Skeksis, we're going to show them eating, and it's awful. This is way worse than anything you saw Jabba the Hutt do. They're so much more gross. Jabba the Hutt's just a big blob swallowing stuff. These guys have their fingers and their... so there's a lot of emphasis here. They don't need to, but it's just to drive home just how disgusting they are. Just tossing stuff around. And see some of the little creatures there in the background that eat the scraps. Once again, reminiscent of Jabba's palace. With the little creatures in the background. Well, they're finally going to actually talk about the plot. Looks like he's eating seaweed. Well, suddenly they're your Gartham? But then again, they might really be, because before he became emperor, he was general. So I guess technically maybe he does think of the Gartham as his. He commanded the Gartham. So that makes sense. Yeah, so the subtitles here are not providing me with names. They all are named, and they all do have distinct personalities. One of them is very deliberately made kind of feminine. The idea is, of course, just like the mystics, essentially the splitting of beings with the mystics. The idea is although they seem kind of overwhelmingly male, there is supposed to be some ambiguity, I guess, to the genders in some of this. Even with Aughra, who I guess you would say is more obviously a female, she's got kind of a, because again, the whole point is it's a completely different world, fantasy. Things are different. So that fat one, I think, is the gourmand or something. That's his main thing, is eating and cooking. And the Gartham have come back, but they don't have a Gelfling. They've got something else. This also helps finally gives you some scale, because it's hard to tell because we've only seen them in separate scenes away from each other and not together. How big are these things compared to a Gelfling? And they're quite a lot bigger. Yeah, they think it's a Gelfling. It ain't no Gelfling. I like how they're all kind of repulsed. I mean, they're ugly as them themselves, but they're like, "Gah, what is this thing?" I'll give her credit. She does not back down at all. You putrid lizards. Nice. That's good stuff. Smacking the Gartham. I'm surprised they don't just execute her on the spot. It's probably been a long time since anybody talked to them in this way. Oh, how crude! It's funny because they're very crude. Harridan. What's a Harridan? They just called her a Harridan. Oh, now she's throwing the prophecy in their face. Oh, doing that setting down thing again. Ah, the crystal bats. These are cool. Yeah, I just played a bit of Resident Evil 6, and I swear, they just use crystal bats. There's this part, if you take the path, the Jake and Sherry game, where you're being, constantly pursued by that kind of unstoppable thing, Ustanok, which is kind of like a BOW version of the Juggernaut. There's a part where you're in an underground mine and you're trying to avoid him. And the idea is there's these bat things flying around, and if they see you, they'll it's almost like he can see through their eyes or something. And they're basically the same thing as crystal bats. Yeah, I love the Dark Crystal. I like Labyrinth a lot, but I'm always so sad that it was overshadowed by Labyrinth. I'm like, I get it. Yeah, we got David Bowie in his crazy Goblin King thing, and there's songs and stuff. But no, I love the Dark Crystal. I'm so happy that they finally did make that show, and the show was so good. And there's various other media about it. I still have to get the corresponding volumes of these, because right now they're just pieces of an incomplete story. But my affection for this movie's only grown probably over the years. And there's a wonderful simplicity to it, and yet. Yeah, I swear that the crystal bats, they just lifted them and used them for the part or Resident Evil 6. It's just like, how about Usanok has crystal bats? And, if they see you, it's he can see through their eyes, apparently. Because that's the whole thing with these crystal bats, is that the Skeksis can see what they see. I like, too, that the idea that there's some sort of, byproduct of the crystal being cracked, maybe. They're like bats merged with crystals. I don't know. She knocked it down, but not out. I always laugh at this, too. So the Mystics, of course, they set out on their own journey, but they're slow as hell. So it's always funny every time it goes back to them because they're so slow. Just to remind us, oh yeah, they're still doing stuff. They're still going. Right. So this village is kind of like, I mean, in Star Wars, when you meet Yoda, he's just living by himself in Dagobah. But you imagine if there was a community of things living in Dagobah, it would be a lot like the Podlings here and their cool little swamp village. Right. So this is, of course, where Kira was raised. Which begs the question, did they teach her this language? The language they speak, which for us is English. Usually when you have a fantasy world and you have characters speaking English, of course, the whole point is, it's more accessible for the audience because, you'll have something like, say, I don't know, Song of Ice and Fire, which is Game of Thrones, right? In Game of Thrones, there's various languages and there's a lot of detail put into them. The idea that, there's the Dothraki have their language, there's the old language High Valyrian, but most people speak English. And usually in movies like that, English is the equivalent of the common tongue. So I assume that's what's going on here. So I have to wonder, the Podlings don't seem capable of speaking the common tongue, and yet Kira is fluent in it, which is really interesting because she was taken from her parents when she was just a little baby. I don't think she could talk back then. But that's one of those things where you're kind of overthinking things a little bit, maybe. For all I know, the Podlings could speak the common tongue just fine. They just choose not to. I mean, they got their own language. I get it. So pretty much none of the stuff the Podling says is subtitled, but it's not that important because they're just kind of in the background while Jen and Kira talk. He's telling her about his quest now. Looks a bit like a scene out of Fraggle Rock or something, which I was a big fan of growing up. Let the music play. Come, you gotta do the Podling dance. And again, with the band there, makes you think of maybe the Cantina the Cantina Band in the New Hope. Oh, he joins in with his little ocarina. Nice. See, every time I see Fitzgig, I still want to call him Jizzkid. Some things are just programmed too deeply, and of course, the party's busted up by the Gotham. I mean, they're here for the Gelflings, but I'm pretty sure they capture a bunch of podlings too, because they always need new slaves. Whacking it with the stick. Now, those things must have taken a lot of people to control because they're really big. I mean, on the one hand, they're not as detailed. They don't have like faces. So I don't have to worry about like facial expressions or like complicated hand movements, but they are very large. Yeah, they're grabbing some podlings, and they've got like, yeah, they got those sort of round cages that they carry them in. You'd see something similar like this done in like a few Alien type movies too. Like they do it in the remake, the Tom Cruise one of War of the Worlds, where like the tripods capture people and put them in these weird things. It's in Terminator, whatever it is, one of the Terminators. All right, and we haven't seen for a while. And here's our appearance of the Chamberlain. To their credit, like, it doesn't matter how nice he is. He's a Sketsy, and it doesn't matter how much he tries to sound like kind and everything. Like they never for a second fall for any of it. Like it's never like they're taken in by his lies or anything. They see him as hostile from the very beginning. Yes, he did just save them from the Garthram, but I think they understand that just means he has his own designs on them, which of course he does. Because he's going to catch up to them here. And he's going to try to explain that he doesn't mean them any sort of harm, but they don't fall for it. Yeah, she says he saved us from his own Gartham. Yeah, that's true, Jen. Wish I never heard of this shard, and throws it away. Yeah, callbacks to all sorts of things like that. It's like when Frodo says, I wish I'd never had the ring had never come to me. I wish none of this had ever happened. There's always that sort of part in the hero quest, especially if you got like an object of power where they kind of reject it, the responsibility and the curse, and they have to. He tossed it away for now, so our big important MacGuffin is tossed over in the bushes, but something tells me it'll be recovered. Okay, I thought Chamberlain caught up to them quicker. Another meanwhile with the Mystics, yeah, they're still going and going. It's like the Energizer commercial, except the idea is like he's just about to run out, but he never does. Everything's in slow motion. Going and going. Yeah, once again, he's realizing he sort of took his simple life for granted. Although, unlike somebody like Luke and a lot of these heroes, like Luke was always like, I gotta get out of this place and into the war and do something, That was not Jen. Jen was happy with his simple life in the village. He never said he needed to get out in the world or be a hero. So that makes him a little different from some of these heroes' journeys, where you usually have some sort of young, impetuous character, in their sort of isolated, sheltered life, but they dream of doing, like, that's like the plot of like half the RPGs I play. But you give credit to Jen. Like, he didn't want to do any of this. But his master died and said, this is what you have to do. And so he went out on it. So they've come across some ruins here. Houses of the old ones, she says. I think they mean, Gelfling civilization, which is what you get to see in the Netflix series. All right, so a little bit of the history here, remembering how, well, not remembering exactly, but just what they were told about how the Skeksis had the Gelflings wiped out. Which is really why Age of Resistance really is kind of terrifying, because, I mean, this movie, this is the aftermath of it, which is bad enough, but it was a bad thing, but it happened a long time ago. Whereas, like, Age of Resistance, you know the whole thing you're watching, you're leading up to it. It's like, this is going to end in genocide. The Skeksis are going to wipe out these people. Or most of them, anyway. It's really interesting, though, because it shows, like, there's different clans of Gelflings that live in different parts of the world, and, you know, the ones that live, I can't remember the names of them anymore, I'll have to watch it again, but the ones that live underground, you'd have to think they probably held out the longest, right? Would have been hard for the Skeksis to find them. Very cool ruins, though, with some, like, hieroglyphics. Which, and here we get to see the beings. It's not till the end, but here we get to see, just in hieroglyph form, and they don't show them very well, but some beings gathered around there, like the beings that the Skeksis and the Mystics used to be before they were split. So you do get a little spoiler here if you're paying attention, that's what they were before the crystal was shattered. Okay, and there's the prophecy I read. By the way, for people wondering, we're at 53 minutes, about 30 seconds, give or take. All right, so now they're putting it together about how to heal the dark crystals, you know, bring the shard to it. So now he catches up to them. Prophecy caused all this troubles. Like, he really tries to sound non-threatening, but he's trying to say, oh, the Skeksis, you know, they killed them out of fear, which is sort of true. I mean, it was fear. But the prophecy didn't say that a Gelfling would kill them all. But I guess they just... This is how people justify these things. Not going to get on a whole thing about about genocide, especially not in real life. But I just watched the movie Conspiracy, the HBO movie from, again, 2001, which just about that, the Weimar meeting, or the Winmar, you know, the meeting they had about the final solution. It's taken from the actual minutes of it. There was only one copy that survived that was found. And it's, you know, these various high-ranking German officials, high-ranking Nazis, sort of calmly discussing, like, the best way to deal with the Jews, and it all came down to, we'll just eradicate them, of course, but it's not just eradicate them, it's like, we need, you know, a practical, cost-effective, you know, way of doing this, and it's just, it's really interesting to watch, and it's horrifying, because, of course, because you realize they're talking about, you know, mass murder of other human beings, and they're talking about it, you know, like it's some sort of infrastructure project or something like that, right? They're talking about like projections, but I mean, it really happened, and that's real history. These things are great. Now, there's actually humans inside these, as I recall. These are not puppets per se. These are like costumes. All these actually have humans in them, because I've seen the footage of that, what they look like if you take them off. The humans sort of walking around on all fours up on like the weird stilts. So very creative, very cool. As I said, I mean, they're going to ride them like horses, but these remind you of horses? No, I mean, they deliberately went out of their way, again, to come up with really original creatures that don't remind you of any sort of, like, animal on Earth. I mean, it could maybe remind you of, like, a combination of several animals. But she's used to them. She's lived out here. She can ride them. He's a little apprehensive. What are those things called? So again, there are names for them. Oh, you were going to leave them behind? You can't leave. It's getting alive. Alone. Landstriders. Okay, that's simple enough. They're the Landstriders. Which is exactly what they do. Sort of an awkward stride, but it's effective. Especially when you've got short little Gelfling legs. So the first time in a while, the music picks up a little bit. Some of that more adventure type theme. I mean, the soundtrack isn't as iconic as the rest, but it fits well enough. I don't know. So here we see some sort of like, I mean, is jail even the right word? But they've got all these different creatures in cages and things. All right. And this guy is like their scientist, and he's always doing experiments on them, which is a big part of Age of Resistance too, because that's where they first figure out the whole thing that he's doing here about training your living essence. Basically, that's one of the first things that happens in Age of Resistance, is it shows like the scientist like accidentally stumbling upon it, because before that, while the Gelflings were subservient to them, they weren't slaves. They weren't just property. Like they did have rights and things. And anyway, I won't say how it happens, but they do inadvertently wind up sort of doing the experiment and realizing they can drain the essence, which helps them sustain the crystal. Because the whole thing that's going on in Age of Resistance is the crystal's still whole, but it's failing, and they know it's probably going to crack. So they're doing everything they can to try to keep it up. And that's where they start this whole thing of the idea of draining the essence out of the Gelflings. Now here we're going to see it done to one of the podlings. And it is quite disturbing, really. See, it's interesting. As far as like a ratings go, there's nothing wrong with showing any of this, but I can just imagine the sort of psychological impact this could have on the child watching something like this happen. This innocent creature strapped to a chair, its eyes going blank. Right. So so the essence is actually drunk by them. It doesn't actually. That's right. I'm getting a little confused. They are trying to sustain the crystal, but the essence thing was not to do that. It was to sustain themselves. It was realizing that he gets some of the power out of the crystal. In fact, maybe that's what led to being cracked in the first place, that they were abusing it. Because this helps them like be more vital and live longer if they drink the essence. But it's no good from podlings. The good stuff is from the Gelflings. Unfortunately, they killed all the Gelflings. But the podling stuff is pretty good. And that's a nice effect. You see his face tauten up there a little bit. Some of the wrinkles go away, making them a little more young and vigorous. Well, that's the thing. The effect is very temporary. You fraud. Yeah, because you just can't get the good stuff from the podlings. So is this guy's name the scientist? Because they have names, but they also have like titles. Yeah, he's the scientist. So technically his name is Skeptic. It's played by Steve Whitmire, who is the guy that voiced Kermit the Frog after Jim Henson's death. But he was fired in 2017. I don't know the details, but yeah, Whitmire's all over those movies, the Muppet movies and things. He's in some other stuff too, interesting stuff, like The Witches, which just got a remake. He was all the way up to Muppets Most Wanted as Kermit. So, I mean, he was Kermit from like 1990 or so on. Like, he's Kermit in Muppet Christmas Carol, Muppet Treasure Island, Muppets from Space, The Muppets, and Muppets Most Wanted. So, yeah, pretty high-profile gig that he no longer holds. But anyway, he is the scientist in this. It's kind of cool. Oh, this is a cool bit. The Land Strider trying to get away from a bunch of the Garthram, trying to save the podlings over the cliff. Shit. I mean, we don't get to see them splattered. That'd be a little too much. But again, the implication is there. Of course, there's a term for that. It's called Disney death. It's like, that's how a lot of bad guys get killed in the end. is they fall off something. We see them fall, but we don't, see them land. But any kid knows falling from a very great height is fatal. We're just not going to show you, Gaston go splat at the end of Beauty and the Beast, because that'd be a bit too much. Yeah, and here's the great reveal that, well, I guess she can't fly. She can glide on her wings. Takes him safely down. His reaction is great. Wings? I don't have wings. Of course not. You're a boy. So, I mean, Gelflings are already kind of like the perfect race, because I have always had a thing for girls with wings. Like, maybe in my world, like, human girls and women would have wings. It's definitely something I've been into. I'm sure there's some nice Rule 34 porn with Gelflings. I just haven't taken the plunge yet. Ah, cool. So, yeah, they find, like, a sort of a secret way into the castle. Very foreboding mouth, but what can you do? And still being followed by Chamberlain, who they did not listen to and ran away from. Because it doesn't matter how much he tries to sound nice, he's a goddamn sketsy, so. Into the cave. Yeah. Shot at Elstree Studios, which I think is in London, or it's somewhere in England anyway. And various exterior scenes were shot in the Scottish Highlands. Pretty cool. Trevor Jones did the soundtrack, by the way. Not a name I recognize. I know it jumps out. Yeah, the film got kind of mixed response at the time. Somebody from the New York Times calling it a watered down J.R.R. Tolkien without charm as well as interest, which is pretty unfair because I mean, it's different how you use the term watered down. Because obviously, like I said, when you're talking about something like Tolkien's Legendarium, you can't get more dense and complex than that. Like every single line in Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and stuff, it all can be. There's so many allusions to parts of the history of that world and all these characters and all these various unfinished things. Whereas at the time, this was it. It was the Dark Crystal. This was, there wasn't anything else to go with. This was it. Oh, there's a good shot. So that's the other thing. They don't just live and die at the same time. So they wound him on the hand there with the crystal. Chamberlain, and then suddenly it shows his corresponding mystic getting a wound on his hand. So he's going to capture Jen, or capture Kira, and that'll be his bargaining chip to try to get back in with the group. So there's Gormand and somebody. They're kind of the two least important of the Skeksis. Like, they don't have any. They're terrified at the sight of the Gelfling, but they don't have any sort of ambitions. They're just there to stuff their faces. So he doesn't even bother with them. He might as well go to the crystal chamber. I still get a kick out of them. And to them, Gelflings are ugly. It's all perception. So here's his bargaining chip. Look, I got a Gelfling. I love how he says "I" here, to remind everybody, that he's the one that did this. I have done this. I have got her. Yeah, we get it. It's you. Oh, he's still going on. Like, now her essence, that would be great. That's really creepy. No, don't be so hasty. Take essence, then kill. Okay, we can live with that. I like how they're just repeating things now. They really enjoy that. Essence, drain her essence. Yeah, that's what's gonna happen, guys. But they just love shouting it out. They're still yelling about it. And like, okay, the Chamberlain's back. He can have his robes, but we still don't like him. Oh yeah, is Jen dead? No, I figure he can't be. We wouldn't have much of a movie if Jen's dead. No, he's not dead. That's one thing they overlooked. I think he was actually stabbed him with the crystal shard. So that's Chamberlain thinks he's made a big deal of, that tripping over my words here. He thinks that the big deal was grabbing a live Gelfling, but he left the shard right there. But he didn't know. Oh, back to the scientist's scary lab. With all of them all. Oh yeah, Ogra. Forgot about Ogra. I'm getting right to it. The scientist actually has like a mechanical arm and leg, which is pretty cool. Sometimes it's hard to catch because they're so grotesque and weird looking, but if you look at them, you'll see that he's got artificial limbs. And the slave master guy, who we've seen before, actually one of his hands is a hook. Pretty cool. She's got the beam on her, but yeah. Gelflings have these abilities that like Jen didn't know anything about, because like she's able to like rouse the animals to her side here. All very interesting looking creatures. So is like the language is she speaking the podling language there, or is she shouting out to the animals? I wonder if that's podling. Well, the animals are breaking free. Time to take revenge on their cruel captor. I mean, that one looks a little bit like a, what's the word? Platypus. But instead of the duckbill, he's got like a long nose. Well, this is a fitting end for you. The animals you imprisoned and tortured. Ooh, down into the fiery furnace. Biblical reference. And one of them disappears in flame. I love this. They all are like, oh, well, what can you do? I mean, that's what it is to have a counterpart that who your fate is linked to inextricably. There's nothing that can be done. They sort of shrug and be like, well, that could happen to any of us at any moment, I suppose. I mean, if they're the mystics are nothing if not serene. Yeah, so of course the timing lines up. The Great Conjunction's about to happen. She says 3 suns touch, but she doesn't mean that literally. Then again, maybe she does. Maybe the suns can touch each other. We've already talked about how it's an impossible world, where if you had 3 suns that close, the world would just be like a boiling, burning hellscape. Oh, they're finally within sight of the palace. 8 left. Right, so the Mystics, I guess technically the name of their race is the Uru, with a capital R in the middle for some reason. Yeah. And again, you have to wonder, like, if this hadn't come out around the same time as E.T., would it have done better? Like a lot of these movies. But again, I think the dark tone really would have thrown audiences with time off. There would have been obviously the rarer person that would have loved it and loved it for their kids or whatever. But the prevailing thought back then really was like to keep stuff really wholesome and happy for kids. I mean, just look at so many of the 80s cartoons back then. Even the ones that were supposed to be violent that I grew up on, like, didn't have anything. Like, the G.I. Joe cartoon is, like, the most neutered, watered-down thing ever. I mean, they can't depict war, so they just depict these, like, fights between heavily armed groups where no one ever gets killed or even hurt over and over again. What kind of terrorist organization are you, Cobra? You never managed to even, like, every once in a while they might blow something up, but they never managed to kill anybody. So yeah, the 80s was really interesting in that you had stuff like that, particularly in the West, stuff being censored. And yet when something with a little edge like this comes through, it's misunderstood or ignored, which is too bad. So there was some good stuff from that era. Oh, there's Fitzgig. You're rolling around. Like another 80s property, the Popples. Remember the Popples? That's what Fitzgig looks like right now. He looks like a popple in rolling mode. So straight up through the pit, climbing the walls is the only way to get in, but he does it. I mean, he has to do something kind of heroic. I mean, most of the time he's just sort of been running around and running away from things. Which is cool, again, because it's not like Jen is like a great warrior or anything like that. That's not the point. Again, he's just sort of a reluctant hero. So, as you can see, is that like the main front door? And why, I was going to say, why isn't it guarded? But of course it is. The Gotham are going to stop them, but the Mystics can just... Oh, here comes their weird Gregorian chant. I mean, if they're called the Mystics, they must have some magic about them, right? There we go, and it causes the Gotham to step aside. Thank you. We'll just let ourselves in. I'm looking at some more review stuff here. The invention is impressive, but there's little indication of the Henson Oz trademark, a sense of giddy fun. Yeah, I mean, no, that's not what this was. And maybe that was the other thing, right? Like, there's not really any comedy really to be found in this. There might, like, there's some stuff I've laughed at, but I mean, you know, jokes and comedic scenes were not really written in because it's not that kind of movie, but maybe that's what people expected too. Because I mean, at that point, Henson, his stuff was all about comedy. It was kids stuff and comedy. Because I mean, the Muppet Show was brilliant in that, like, really the humor was more aimed at adults. But this is different. This is a serious fantasy story being told. And people just weren't ready for it at the time. Particularly maybe not from Henson. Because he's saying a giddy sense of fun is missing. I mean, I feel like if you had a giddy sense of fun in this movie, it would fucking ruin it. Like, I really think that would mess with the tone. I think this movie just strikes a great balance of sort of light and dark. It's a dark movie, but, you know, it's still light enough that I think most kids could watch it and be okay. And it has moments of fun, but the fun is more like adventure. It's not like telling jokes or, you know, goddamn slapstick, you know? So I think it's just another indication of how misunderstood the movie was at the time. Gene Siskel at the time, giving it 2.5 out of 4 stars. The reluctant absence of dramatic tension cripples Crystal. It doesn't have much going for it, save the weird characters, who look like it just walked in from the bar scene in Star Wars. In fact, this movie looks like it was ripped from Star Wars, which I don't agree with, even though I did just mention there's a lot of crossover. I don't think so. I think in a weird way, this movie, like the environments and the characters, I think a lot, probably more planning and detail went into them than in Star Wars. Now, not the main Star Wars characters. I'm just saying, though, like, you're going to tell me that, like, the stuff in this doesn't look as good as the stuff in the cantina scene. I mean, the cantina scene is iconic, and I love it. And part of its charm is, like, I don't think, Star Wars was a movie, they didn't have a huge budget. They didn't think was going to have much of an audience, was going to come and go. So the cantina scene is what it is. It looks like a bunch of weirdness just slapped together kind of last minute, and they hoped it would work. There wasn't a lot of thought, time, and preparation and effort put into it. I'm not taking anything away with it because there was some. I'm just saying, I think they were just saying, whatever's weird and awkward and cool, you think, just stick it in there. Whereas I think this was much more meticulously planned, because where Star Wars, of course, is a whole galaxy, different planets, the whole point is a mosaic. Aliens from this planet and this planet, and just so many different looks. Whereas this is a one cohesive look, one planet. So I don't think ripped off from Star Wars is at all fair, despite the fact that, yes, there is a little bit of overlap and similarity, I think. But yeah, nowadays, it's definitely considered a classic or cult classic or whatever you want to call it, which I'm glad about. And that's probably one of the reasons why I didn't even see it until I was a bit older, because it didn't really have a great reputation when I was a kid growing up. But I adore it and always have. And for a movie that I said, like, some of its brilliance is how simple it is. There's some complexity underneath, too. Like the idea of how the Skeksis and the Mystics used to be one race that got split when the crystal broke. That's interesting. How come none of them notice that the scientist is missing? They just don't care? Ah, shit, there's the other one. There's 2 of them? Yeah, he didn't tell them about the other one because he assumed he killed him. Now the shit's really hitting the fan. 2 of them. Really only one thing to do. Now this whole thing where he, like, the only thing he can do is jump onto the crystal. I mean, there's no point in me saying this, especially without spoilers, but I wrote a story called, actually, The Dark Staircase, and there's a moment in it where the hero does something kind of similar. And I can't say that I wasn't influenced by that, but I think it's different enough if it ever gets published. I wrote that about 10 years ago, and I mean, I've written things my whole life, but I think that is, like, the first thing that I felt like is good enough that in the right situation is publishable. The only problem with it is, like, it's in that weird, awkward space as far as length goes. Like, it's not a novel, but it's too short to be a novella too. But it's too long to be the typical short story. Like, when I would look at, like, things like magazines and publications that will, they'll take submissions of short stories. Usually they mean really short. Usually they mean 2,500 words and maybe 5,000 at the longest. This story is probably between 9,000 and 10,000 words, which is a really awkward sort of length. So, not that I'm making excuses. And I've been trying to write a longer sequel to that for, like, the last 10 years, and I've done very little work on it, despite having more time than most writers get. So I really got to get off my ass and work. So, oh, there's the moment. Stabbed. Yeah, I'm pretty bleak here. So we don't know what's going to happen. We just saw Kira get stabbed and apparently die. So either the main sun is huge or the third sun is tiny, because there's a big disparity in sizes between those suns. Or maybe it's just a distance thing. Maybe the huge one isn't any bigger, it's just closer. Alright, so climax of the movie here. The crystal has been repaired or healed or whatever. Not that generally cares, because all I can think about is Kira lying there, supposedly dead. I love that. The Garth room literally fall apart. What does that mean? What does that mean? What's their link to the crystal there? Because, I mean, again, the whole point of the crystal is like it kind of has a direct link to how everything in this world works. That's why the world is like desolate and blasted, because the crystal is sick and broken. But now that it's been repaired, the Garth room, which I had to think might have been born out of the original cracking, now they're destroyed. Oh, look is finally here. So everybody's like wondering what the hell's going to happen at this point when the extremely slow, extremely sort of passive mystics finally confront their counterparts, the Skeksis. It's like, are they going to have a physical fight? What would that look like? But, the right thing happens. Oh, nice shot there from the outside with sunlight coming through, or the three suns. My three suns. Lots of falling debris, but none of it hitting Agra, which is lucky. She finds Fizzgig, right? Yeah, she does. Because, yeah, Fizzgig got tossed down the pit, but he's hanging onto the wall. Agra's going to get him. Ooh, even some tears coming down. The place is falling apart. Up some volume, I don't care. Let's get some volume in this. And Skeksis just have no idea what to do. They're just sort of running around in circles. And Kira's definitely dead. Ah, there we go. So the light of the crystals filters through the mystics, comes out their eyes, and hits their Skeksis counterparts, drawing them back together. This is a very cool moment. Again, I don't know how you could say this is like a rip-off of that or it's generic. I think this is very unique and interesting. This whole coming together of the two different races or species or whatever you want to call. And I like how their original forms are somewhat ethereal, almost angelic or something, which is in a lot of sort of mythology. Like they're kind of like beings of light, so they're luminescent beings here. Not this crude matter. God, I keep quoting Star Wars, don't I? And they're so cool. What was sundered and undone. Yeah, great. Prophecy. Woo. Yeah. So there's 8 of them. The ones that died are dead and gone. Right. So, I made a mistake there. The crystal had already been broken at the time of Age of Resistance, obviously, because these beings weren't around. The split had already happened. But the world still wasn't quite as dead and messed up as it would become. I forget where it says exactly how long before the events of this movie Age of Resistance is. It might only be a few decades. But from the starting point of this movie, the actual original breaking of the crystal and the separation was 1,000 years before that. Now they use their weird power to bring her back Which again, I guess you can. It seems like one of those moments that is in a movie, like a fantasy movie for kids. It's like, oh, of course, and they have the power to bring back the person that died. Maybe that is a cliche. I don't know, but it seems like kind of they call it the crystal of truth. Now that it's restored, it's not the dark crystal anymore. But it seems like the least they can do with their crazy, holy, ethereal power is maybe, bring back one of the people that saved the world and save them. Right. So if you put Skeksis and Earths or whatever together, they are the Earth Skeks, is technically what they're called. So now they're going to ascend to some higher plane of existence. And time to build a new world and a rejuvenated Thra, as the crystal will heal the world, which is pretty cool. I mean, it's just as well and it's instant, the crystal. Oh, I love it. Great last shot. It's interesting. Jen doesn't actually have any dialogue for the last quite a few minutes of the movie. It's just sort of him looking and reacting to stuff. But I like how they say what they are. Jen and Kira, a Gelfling. Aughra, a keeper of secrets. Fitzgig, a friendly monster. The Skeksis, master of the Dark Crystal. So you got Chamberlain, performed by Frank Oz. General, who's the Gartham master. High priest, ritual master. Scientist, gourmand. Ornamentalist, historian, scroll creeper. Slave master, and treasurer. And the mystics, Urza and the Dying Master, which I guess was Jen's master. Weaver, cook, numerologist, hunter, who you do see with a bow at one point. Chanter, scribe, alchemist, and healer, who had 2 performers for some reason. And you see the people as Landstriders, additional performances. So Lisa Maxwell is the voice of Kira. Another name I know, Stephen Garlick, is Jen. Not names that jump out of the page besides Steve Whitmire now because of his famous Kermit. But I think it's just as well they didn't make a sequel to this in the 90s or something. I think it probably would have sucked. The 80s was just a great time. It was just a rich time for fantasy, and it really fell off a cliff in the 90s. It was really sort of a barren wasteland. There's fantasy here and there in the 90s, but not much. Certainly not much of the really classic, iconic stuff. And going back to 2001 again, since that's been a theme of tonight's show, tonight's live commentary, is the 2001, the Fellowship of the Ring movie and the first Harry Potter movie, the Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, both came out in 2001. So that really kind of kickstarted and got the genre going again. Although I don't think as many good ones have been made in the 2000s as the 80s, because a lot of them then were just sort of YA fantasy novels adapted, which mostly to me there's some really good ones, but something I like about the Dark Crystal is that it wasn't based on anything. And now there are things based off the movie. As we said, there's various spin-off material, although it was kind of slow in the coming. But I don't know. I love Jim Henson. He's just one of my favorite people, one of my favorite artists. I love his legacy. I mean, what a crazy not just his talent, but the risk he took. Imagine, he's in his in the 60s, starting out as a puppeteer. Everybody must have told him, what kind of career do you think you're going to have as a puppeteer, man? And yet he just he elevated it. He brought it up to a higher level and did all these wonderful, amazing things with it, with the Muppets and the Sesame Street characters. And a movie like this was really sort of, once again, taking a big risk, because now he was stepping outside his sort of comfort zone because he really wanted to do a dark kind of fantasy. He said he was inspired by sort of the Brothers Grimm tales and other fairy tales, and he wanted to do something like that, but with a darker side to it. And it makes perfect sense, because then you can create your own world. I love this, wholly created world. Again, it's a live action movie with no humans at all, which is so cool. And I'm so glad that, I don't think there was ever any sort of question of this, but when they made Age of Resistance, that it's the same thing. They didn't just make some computer animated show, which I would still watch, but I mean, really, the whole point is for the puppets and the puppetry and the animatronics and all that cool stuff. So yeah, the main theme here is memorable, I think. I do think the main theme that's getting played here, the main theme of the movie, is memorable. It is very good. It fits very well. It's very powerful. To date, it technically remains one of the highest-grossing puppet animated films of all time, particularly for its domestic gross. So how's that going for it? But yeah, they call it like watered down Tolkien or ripping off Star Wars. Like, no, I don't agree with that at all. Or people that are upset about the tone, thinking, oh, it should have been more happy and comedic and nicer for kids. Once again, fuck no, I don't want to see that. And it's another nice bit about how well they did with the Age of Resistance show, because they didn't try to turn it into some sort of goofy Saturday morning cartoon thing. They kept the tone and the spirit of the original very well. I mean, Jim Henson wasn't alive to see it. I have to imagine if he was alive, he would have been involved. It seems too bad because I think he would have liked it. I mean, I don't know him, so I don't know for sure. But obviously, people who knew him and worked with him were involved in that, so that helps. Elstree Studios, Hertfordshire, England. Yeah. So that's the one you voted for, so that's why we did it tonight. Well, actually, wasn't going to do anyone tonight, but then some plans changed, and the opportunity came up, and I thought, why not? I have the time. So yeah, so this it follows Secret of Nim nicely, because they are both sort of dark fantasy films, and they're from the same year, 82. But the other movies that were in the poll, I'm going to do them. So I mean, the poll was kind of just for fun, really, to gauge people's interest and see who was actually wanting to watch this and get into it. And I got a pretty good response. So the other movies in the poll were Batman: Mask of the Phantasm, Return to Oz, and what the hell was the other one? You think I'd remember? I made the poll, and again, it's movies that I know really well. That's the point of this. It'll come to me, but anyway, I'm going to do those two. I will do the other ones. So yes, for these ones that I guess are going to be solo ones, because I can blab through the whole. Yeah, the whole point is really just giving my own impressions and memories of these movies, and hopefully some people can find some entertainment in that. For anybody that watched live, that's cool. But if you're watching this later, yeah, I hope that, maybe you saw this and you thought, oh, here's a chance to, have a different experience with the movie. So you could sync it up, put it on, and watch while I blab through it. But I might be blabbing through it, but I try my best to stay on topic, because I really want to talk about the movie. That really is the point of these. When I do ones with friends like Jay and stuff, we talk about the movie, but obviously, we're going to go off topic and talk about other things, because it's more of like a friends hanging out situation, which I love. I treasure. It's like, it's about as great as my social life gets these days, really. So it's really important to me. But I'm happy to embark on these solo ones just so I can really express my admiration for these movies that I've loved for so long, that mean a lot to me. Talk about, why I like them and what they mean to me, and things like that. And maybe provide a little bit of background information and stuff that I know that people can find out if they do Wikipedia and stuff like that. But, I try to all mix it all together so it's something halfway interesting or entertainment. Yeah, so this movie you can watch. At least one thing about this 25th anniversary is you can watch commentary with Brian Froud, which I probably did years ago, but I don't remember it, so I'll have to watch it again. So that's another option. If you don't want to listen to me blab, you can watch it with Brian Froud's commentary, because obviously Jim Henson wasn't around to record commentary for this movie, which is very sad. Love Jim Henson, love The Dark Crystal. So thanks a lot for being with me. We'll wrap up here so it doesn't go on too long, but yeah, probably in the next little while I'll do some, I'm hoping with Jay and maybe even Orc or somebody, do some martial arts movies, live commentaries. Those are the less focused ones. We'll talk about the movie, but, we'll shoot the shit and stuff too, because it's about hanging out. But try to keep these going at a reasonable pace. So I'm sure within a few days or the next week or so, I will do the next one, which could be Batman: Mask of the Phantasm, or Return to Oz, or whatever the hell the third one was that I can no longer recall. Which, should I really be dragging this out? I should just finish off. It's just really bothering me that I can't remember. I'm looking around the room at the movies I own, the ones that are within sight. But anyway, speaking of being ambitious, I think I will do the Lord of the Rings movies on here, the big, long 3-hour ones, because why the hell not? Maybe nobody will watch, but I'll enjoy doing it, and I'll have the time to do it, so I'm going to do that. So, yeah, so that's not right away. I'm going to do some of these shorter, simpler movies first, but I really do think I'm going to do some big, ambitious things like the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I'm really on a fantasy kick, so a lot of these movies are movies that, yeah, there are mostly fantasy movies that mean a lot to me, because if I love all genres, but if I had to pick a genre I like best, I suppose it's fantasy. And again, you can break fantasy down into many subgenres, and you can also combine fantasy with other genres. So it's it's pretty wide open. Anyway, thanks again. Dark Crystal, 1982, directed by Jim Henson and Frank Oz. Wonderful, talented people. Great movie. I mean, is it just a classic now, or is it still a cult classic? I don't know. Like a lot of those movies from a time, it seems like it was misunderstood in its time, but nowadays I think a lot of people see it rightly as a really great movie and classic, and I love it, and I hope that, current generations and future generations will be exposed to it, because I do think it is really cool. And yeah, that whole dark fantasy, but somewhat kid appropriate. I'm some of my favorite stuff falls right into that. So anyway, thanks a lot. That'll finish it off. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. Peace out. I'll see you next time.